Hey guys, I wanted to tell you today about my favorite Bible character. His story can be found at the end of Genesis, the last 14 chapters. We pick up Joseph's story when he was just 17. Joseph had many brothers because his father had several wives, but Joseph still remained his father's favorite, so much so that his father gave him a beautiful coat. And every time his brothers would see this coat, they would just have anger and resentment burn in their hearts. And this was further fueled by a couple of dreams that Joseph had. And the interpretation of those dreams was that one day Joseph's brothers and parents would come and bow before him. And this really fueled the flames of just resentment and anger. Well, one day Joseph's brothers were working far off in a field, and his father sent Joseph to check on them. And while he was coming, they saw that coat coming down the road. They schemed and plotted to kill him. One of the brothers talked everybody else into just throwing him into a pit and then dealing with it later. So they, instead of welcoming him, they grabbed him up, threw him in the pit. One of the older brothers, Judah, thought, what benefit is it to me if he just dies? So he decided to sell him instead. A caravan came through of people going to Egypt, and he sold Joseph for 20 pieces of silver. Joseph was brought to Egypt and then sold as a slave into Potiphar's house. And here we see in Genesis chapter 39, verse 2, it says, the Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of his Egyptian master. The Lord blessed his work. Joseph continued to act justly and uprightly. Even when other people noticed how successful he was, Potiphar's wife came to him and tried to seduce him. But Joseph acted in an honest and upright fashion. Potiphar's wife had to invent some lie about him sleeping with her, and this landed Joseph in prison. He didn't expect to be in prison, but here we, again in chapter 39, verses 21 through 23, it says, but the Lord was with Joseph and showed him steadfast love and gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. The Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made it succeed. Well, eventually 2 other people joined Joseph in prison. They both served the Pharaoh. One was a cupbearer, the other was a baker, and during that time they both had dreams. Joseph gave them interpretations of their dreams, and what he said came to pass. So the cupbearer ended up going back to work for Pharaoh, and as he was leaving, Joseph said, please don't forget me. Remember me here. Well, 2 years passed. 2 years. And the Pharaoh had a dream. And this dream was puzzling, and he'd called his council and his wise men and his magicians all to him, but no one could tell him what it meant. The cupbearer overheard this, and he suddenly remembered, there was this guy in prison, and he was able to interpret my dreams. So Pharaoh called Joseph in, and he told him his dream. Joseph listened, and God gave him the interpretation, and Joseph said, there's going to be 7 years of plentiful, bountiful harvest, followed by 7 years of famine. Pharaoh saw Joseph and just his wisdom, his God-given wisdom, and he decided to put Joseph in charge of a program to store up enough food to last for the famine. So Joseph was given a lot of power. He was made second in command. Joseph began to gather up the grain during the 7 years of plenty, and he gathered so much that in chapter 41, verse 49, it says it was like the sand of the sea, until he ceased to measure it, for it could not be measured. Again, we see that God is with Joseph, and what Joseph did prospered. Now, the time of famine did come, and Egypt had enough storehouses to come and buy grain, thanks to Joseph's hard work. But the other nations around also heard that Egypt had this plenty of grain, so they would come as well to buy. And wouldn't you know it, one day 10 brothers came, and they bowed low before Joseph, and they bought grain. Joseph instantly recognized that they were his brothers, and he proceeded to test his brothers to see if their heart had changed. He found that it had, and he invited his brothers and his father and their whole family to come and settle in Egypt. And they did. Now, eventually Joseph's father passed away, and his brothers came before him and threw themselves on the ground in fear because they thought, well, now our father's gone, and Joseph is finally going to get us back for what we did to him all those years ago. But you guys, in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, it says, Joseph said to them, do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. Guys, I think a lot of us find ourselves in similar situations to Joseph. I mean, maybe we're not in a pit, maybe we're not put in prison, maybe we're not accused of adultery, but maybe we've lost jobs, we're just discouraged, we're lonely, we're hurting right now, we're not where we expected to be, we're not where we planned to be. You guys, we can look at Joseph's story, and we can choose like he did to believe and trust that God is faithful and his steadfast love is with us during this time. Joseph, we don't see Joseph here wallowing in the things that had happened to him. He's not wallowing in self-pity, but he's choosing to set his mind on God's faithfulness and act justly and live according to the way the Lord have him to live. You guys, we can choose that during this time. I want you to be encouraged. This is one of my favorite Bible characters for this very reason. I often find myself in situations where I am discouraged, and I just remind myself, God is faithful, and he is with us.